Hebrews chapter 3. Beginning at verse 1. Therefore, holy brethren, who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, the apostle and high priest whom we confess. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, testifying to what would be said in the future. But Christ is faithful as a son over God's house. And we are his house if we hold on to our courage and the hope of which we boast. We started last week by considering the theme that runs through all of the post-COVID church, the need to fix our eyes on Jesus. Whatever else happens, to keep Jesus in the foreground and everything else in the background. And in today's session, we're kind of looking actually at the same lesson, because if you've watched the video already, and I know some are watching and then listening on Sunday, and then others are doing it the other way. You'll listen today and then do the video in the week. But you'll know that that is the focus of that first session. Who have we got our eyes fixed upon? Where is our hope? What are we looking at? So I want to tell you about a man called Earl Nightingale. Some of you may have heard of him. Earl Nightingale was a Marine in the Second World War. And as the war ended and he came out of the Marines, he had to decide what he was going to do with himself. And he decided he wanted to do some studying, because he wanted to ask a question. You know, these nations that had spent so long at war with each other, and it troubled him what was in people's hearts and what was in people's minds. And he wanted to know if philosophy or religion had any insight into any understanding to what made people do the things that they did. And he spent years researching philosophy and psychology and reading different religious texts and trying to work out what was going on. And he came to a conclusion, and he actually spent most of the rest of his life making a very successful career out of speaking about this one conclusion. And you can still buy Earl Nightingale's tapes and books and records today. And you can find him on YouTube if you want to listen to him. And he said that there was one theme. As far as I know, he would have claimed, like many Americans, to be a Christian. He wasn't a convert to any other religion or anything. But he said there was one theme that seemed to keep coming up. Whether he was reading religion or whether he was reading philosophy or whether he was reading psychology, there was one theme that kept recurring. And he came to the conclusion it was possibly the most important thing that he could say to anyone or teach anyone. And it was this: we become what we think about most of the time. We become what we think about most of the time. And in one sense, that sounds a very unprofound statement of the obvious. And yet, at another level, it's hugely profound. Now, you might say, well, what did he mean by that? Those words are very carefully chosen. Did he mean that we become what we think about for most of the time? Or did he mean that most of the time we become what we think about? And his answer was yes. Both. Because occasionally something absolutely traumatic happens that completely changes your life. Not just a kind of once in a lifetime, but a once in a blue moon event, like a world war, like a catastrophe, like a Dunblane, that just completely changes the whole of your life. But that tends to be the exception. Most people, most of the time, that's not what happens. Most of the time, you and I become what we spend most of our time thinking about. We become what we think about most of the time. If you've ever read the best-selling Christian book, Celebration of Discipline, which was very popular in the 80s and early 90s, it was a book that reintroduced a new generation of Christians to the spiritual disciplines. If you've ever read that book, and it was an international bestseller, he makes the same point on the chapter about meditation. He said, why are Christians called to meditate? Why is the Bible full of instructions on meditating upon the things of God? He said, because the mind takes on the structure of what we contemplate. Our hearts, our characters begin to take on the structure of whatever we ponder and consider at depth. We become what we think about most of the time. And this can become a very depressing, self-fulfilling prophecy. If you spend most of your time thinking about negative things, you become a negative person. If you spend most of your time thinking about and being critical, you become a critical person. It doesn't just stay out there. It actually begins to shape in here. If we think and speak about unhappy things most of the time, we become unhappy people. So when you start to think about this at some depth, it's actually hugely profound. Turned around another way, I am who I am today because of what I have chosen to focus on. You are who you are today because of the countless thousands of decisions you've made down through the years of what you're going to fix your mind on. This is very countercultural. I think I mentioned before, I've got a close friend who's a counsellor, and she says, people struggle with this. 90% of her counselling is around this issue, that people come to her and say, well, so-and-so did this to me, and so-and-so did that to me, and I've been the victim of this, and I've had this done to me, and she said, people don't want to hear what I have to say in counselling. Which is to say, actually, the person who's done most of the damage to you in your life is you. And that when you think about it, that is an awful, difficult truth to get your head around. Because what she teaches, she says to people, you're right, horrible things have happened to you. People have done dreadful things. Things have happened that never should have happened. Life has been hard. Life has been unfair. But 9 times out of 10, we are where we are. Or 95 times out of 100, we are where we are because of the responses we have chosen to make to those events. Different responses would have taken our lives in different direction. Different responses would have led us down the road of a different heart and a different character. And all she's saying is what Earl Nightingale was saying in the late 1940s. What I focus on, what I choose to think about, what I choose to fill my mind with, what I choose to fill my thoughts with, how I choose to interpret and think about things is the most powerful force in the world for shaping my character and my life. Is it any wonder then that Scripture is full of commands as to where we should direct our hearts, where we should focus our minds? Maybe, just maybe, they knew something by the Spirit of God hundreds of years ago that modern psychology and philosophy is just catching up with. Maybe by the Spirit of God, they knew that same truth, that what you focus your heart on, what you focus your mind on, what you focus your life around will determine who you become. And that's why the writer to Hebrews, as he comes to this struggling group of Christians who want to give up, that's why he encourages them. What are you thinking about? What are you filling your mind with? And he gives them three instructions, and three instructions that speak to us today as well. The first one is right at the beginning. He basically says to them, behold Jesus. Behold Jesus. Now, the NIV has fix your thoughts on Jesus. I think some translations have it as consider him. So you might have consider him. The NIV is trying to give you the English sense of the word. Consider is a bit of a weak translation. It really means to observe fully, to observe in detail, to fix one's eyes or mind upon. And the key concept there is to fix. It's to fix. It's not a glance. It's a fix. Behold him. Fix your thoughts, fix your heart, fix your eyes on Jesus. Now, how does he describe Jesus? This is important. He's our apostle and our high priest. Now, why are those both important? An apostle is one sent from God, and a high priest is one who represents people to God. So what he's saying is the reason we need to fix our eyes on Jesus is, firstly, Jesus is the one who brings God to us. Jesus is the one who brings God to us. Jesus brings God out of heaven, out of the unknown, right here now in front of our eyes and our minds. We talk a lot about the deity of Jesus Christ, the fact that he is fully God. But just as important as the deity of Jesus is the Jesusness of God. I don't know if you've ever considered that. It's not just that Jesus is fully God, it's that God is fully like Jesus. So that when you see the face of Jesus, you are looking into the heart of God. When you see the face of Jesus, you are looking into the heart of God. John 1, it often says, that translation about the word that became flesh. And the word was with God and the word was God. And then right at the end, it says something that we skip over. We don't quite get. It says, no one has ever seen God, but God, the only Son, who is in the Father's heart, has made him known. Now, just pause on that for a minute. He starts off by saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But he ends up saying something else even more profound. The Word wasn't just with God, the Word was in the Father's heart. Jesus is the heart of our Father made flesh and blood. Which also means that if you come to God through Jesus, you don't just come to God, you don't just come to God as Father, you actually come through Jesus to the very heart of God. And we'll pick up that theme a little later in Hebrews. But we should fix our eyes on Jesus, because to look into the face of Jesus is to see the heart of God. But the other side of it is the great high priest, he doesn't just bring God to us, he brings us to God. That's what a high priest does. The priest is a bridge builder. He builds the bridge so that people can come to God. So why should we fix our hearts and our minds on Jesus? Because there is no one else who can reveal God like Jesus. And there is no one who can bring us into the presence of God and into relationship with God like Jesus. Behold him, says the writer. Fix your eyes on him. And the second thing he says is compare him. Compare him to everything else. That's what all this slightly might be confusing stuff in verses 2 to 6 is all about. Moses and God's house. I mean, what's all of that? Well, the background is Numbers chapter 12. Now, the readers of Hebrews, being steeped in the Old Testament, would have got the reference instantly. We often don't. But they would have understood it's a reference to Numbers chapter 12, where God refers to the people of Israel as his house, or if you like, his household. And Moses was the great figure in the Old Testament, the great Old Testament hero. In fact, Time magazine many, many years ago did a survey of experts across the world, and they said, can you list the greatest leaders in history? Can we get a list together of the top 10 greatest leaders that have ever lived? Moses came third. That's not bad, is it? Moses came third. He was the great figure of the Old Testament. And the writer says, do you know what? He was just a servant, a faithful servant, but he was just a servant in God's family. But Jesus is a son over God's family. And the point he's making, and he makes it elsewhere in Hebrews, all through Hebrews, in fact, is he says to his writers, whatever you can think about in the old covenant, our Old Testament, you know, the old Jewish religion, whatever you can think about in that religion that's special to you, Jesus is greater. Jesus is supreme. Jesus is above and beyond it. So why would you go back? Why would you go back? Because whatever it is you're going back to, Jesus offers more. Jesus trumps it. Now, one of my favorite websites, I have to confess, is comparethemarket.com. And I regularly try and find reasons to go to comparethemarket.com, and other websites are available, of a similar nature, but they don't give the free cuddly meerkat toys. And I do have an almost complete collection of the free cuddly meerkat toys at home. Not too proud to say that. And then it got even better when they started offering 2 for 1 at cinemas. That was quite good. And then 2 for 1 at restaurants. Well, I was absolutely in for that one. But if you've ever used Compare the Market, and that meerkat thing must be one of the most longest running adverts. It's been going for over a decade and they still keep using it. It just something about it resonates with people. But the idea is perfectly simple. You put in your details, it compares all the different offers are available and says to you, for what you're looking for, this is the best one. Best one. And that's what the writer here is saying. He's sort of not so much compare the market or compare the meerkat as compare the Messiah. If you go into the search engine and you put the things that are really important in life, and I mean really important in life, not I want a new car or a new holiday or a bigger house or whatever. I mean the stuff, you know, the stuff that we've been learning through the pandemic about what's really important. So you put that into the search engine and you will discover Jesus comes top of the list every time. Jesus comes top of the list every time. In fact, I'm working just preliminary on a series that I might get to be able to do next year, looking at how Jesus is the answer to the deepest needs and aspirations of human life. Looking at the titles and claims he made about himself. And it is quite remarkable. We're used to Jesus, you know, the idea that he's the savior from our sins. And that is at the heart of the gospel. And that's vitally important. But he actually claims even more than that. What he claims is that the life that he offers is actually true life, is the real life, is the fulfillment of all true human aspiration. Because we're made in the image of God and we long for God, and only through Jesus can we find the real life that fulfills. So the writer says, as you behold him, then also compare him. And you will find that there's nothing worth going back for. Instead, press on. Which brings to the third and final thing he says. You behold him, you compare him, and then you hold on to him. You hold on to him. He says, we are his house in verse 6. If we hold on to our courage, and again, some translations have it as confidence, which is actually a better word. We'll get that in a moment. We hold on to our confidence and the hope of which we boast. And hope and confidence in Hebrews have particular meanings. Hope in the book of Hebrews, if you read it all the way through, there's a lot about hope. Hope is really our heavenly home. Hope is what it means in Hebrews is hope is our belief, our comfort, our reassurance that one day God will take us to our true home, which is to be with him. That's our great hope. And confidence in Hebrews is linked to it. Confidence in Hebrews has a very specific meaning. It's knowing we have the right to come into the presence of God. Now you've got to remember, he's writing to they were possibly Pharisees, they were possibly priests, but they were certainly Jewish converts who knew their Old Testament inside out. They understood about the priesthood, they understood about the temple. You know that the high priest could only go into the Holy of Holies, that special sacred place at the heart of the temple. They could only go into the Holy of Holies once a year. And that was on the Day of Atonement. And what the Hebrews writer says, what was reserved for one person on one day of the year is now the right of every Christian on every day of the year. Now we kind of look at that and think, yeah, that's profound, isn't it? But to a Jew, that was absolutely revolutionary. Their whole religion was built around the temple. Their whole religion was built around the sacrifices that went on with the temple. And they all knew only the high priest, only once a year, only on a special day. And the writer of the Hebrews says, no, not now, not because of Jesus. Now, all God's people, every one of us, any day and every day, through the blood of Jesus, can come into the very presence of God. And you can see how the two are connected, the confidence and the hope. Because if we have the confidence that we can come into God's presence any and every day, but then, we come out again because life goes on. But one day we will go into God's presence and never come out. One day we will go into God's presence in a very profound and different way, in an eternal way. And that's our hope. We won't just push into God's presence spiritually and then come out again. We will be with God forever. Confidence now and hope for the future. You see how they link together? If we hold on. If we hold on. Don't give up and don't go back. And as I thought about it, I realized that these three are actually connected, that they actually flow one to the other. Because if you behold him, if you fix your heart upon him, if you consider him as your apostle and your priest, then you will begin to ponder what compares to him. And you will begin to realize that nothing compares to him, not really. And as you realize that nothing compares to him, then comes the strength to hold on to him. Because however difficult it is, why would you let go? Why would you let go? Because whatever you let go of it's not going to compare to him. So why not hold on? So as you ponder, you compare. And as you compare, you realize. And as you realize, God gives you strength to hold on. Behold him, compare him, and hold on to him. I want to finish. Started by talking about Earl Nightingale. We become what we think about most of the time. And this is our great hope, that if we behold him and ponder him, we will become more like him. But I want to finish by talking about somebody else, Rory McIlroy. Any of you watch the Ryder Cup? We're not doing too well at the moment. And Rory McIlroy, the Irish golfer, is having a nightmare. He might as well go out and play with a snooker cue at the moment. It's just not working for him. But what people may not realize is there's possibly a reason why he's having a bad time. Because 10 years ago, he played on that same course as a young professional golfer on the way up. And he had an absolute nightmare. It was 2011, and it was the US Masters. And Rory McIlroy had played 3 rounds of near faultless golf. He went into the final day with a 4-shot lead. And everyone said this was his breakthrough tournament. The young man from Northern Ireland was about to announce his arrival on the stage of world golf by winning one of the top 4 major golfing tournaments. And instead, he had an absolute nightmare. He started off 4 shots in the lead, and he ended the day 10 shots behind. It was considered the worst meltdown that they'd ever seen on the Masters course. And many commentators said it will take him years to get over it, years to come back from that. And I was actually just reading some of the reviews of what happened, just to make sure I was remembering it correctly. And they all remarked at the fact that at one point he looked in tears, that he just couldn't cope with what was happening. And his head was down and he just wanted to get off the course as quickly as possible. A few days later, he met up with his coach. And he said, his coach, and he was saying, well, what do I do? How do I cope with this? How do I come back from this? What do I do? His coach says, I want you to look at the tape and I want you to notice something. Let's replay some of those holes. And he said to Rory McIlroy, what are you doing here on these holes? Where is your head? And he said, well, it's down. It's down at my feet. And his coach said something that sounds, to us, would sound ridiculous, but he said, and that's why it went wrong. That's why it went wrong. You had your eyes fixed on the wrong thing. You had your head down looking at your feet. And all the time you think, oh, it's all going wrong. It's all a disaster. Because where you were looking was determining what you were thinking. He said, do you know where you look when you play well? You look up. You look up, you look at the flag, you look at the horizon, you look where you're going to hit the ball, you look at the target, you look at what you're aiming for. And Rory McIlroy thought, well, it can't be as simple as that. And his coach said, it is as simple as that. It is simple as that, because where you fix your eyes determines where that ball goes. He said, when you come to your next major, whatever happens, you keep your eyes on the flag. Whatever happens, you keep looking at the horizon, where you're going to hit that ball and where you're going to get it in the hole. Rory McIlroy went out 2 months later and won the US Open by 8 shots. Considered one of the best 72 holes of golf ever played. And the secret was where he had his eyes. Where are your eyes fixed as we come out of all of this? What are you thinking about? What are you pondering? Behold him, consider him, and hold on to him, because you will become what you think about most of the time.